Hello, my name is Kai, and I am a bit of a rambler. I like to travel, learn, and tell stories. And I want to talk about language learning today in general. When you get into traveling, as much as I did, or even just a bit, your first new country can be kind of overwhelming when you land and everybody is making sounds that you don't understand, in different cadences especially. If people spoke with the same cadence as I'm speaking now, or any standard, whatever cadence you're used to, the rhythm of the speech from where you're from, it would be much easier to translate. But they don't. A lot of countries fit more or less phonemes into the same space you would use to get your meaning across. There's actually an interesting study about this showing that even though in languages where you speak faster and more phonemes are spoken in the same amount of time, the general amount of meaning imparted by vocal language doesn't change between cultures or languages that much. So if China uses 我是的, like mine, versus mine in English, Chinese people are saying 3 words for the Americans' single word. But both languages are conveying the same meaning in about the same amount of time, even if more words or less words are used. So let's get some meaning across. How do you more easily learn languages, and why should you learn the languages of the country? We can start with that. You should learn the language for the obvious reason that you'll be able to talk to people, but it's going to make your time wherever you are so much more interesting. Not the least of which because if you can speak even just a little bit to the locals in the area, they are going to like you way more, and they're going to share things with you that you never would have known if you couldn't speak to anybody. Now, there are a lot of countries that do speak English at some level, but there are a lot that don't. Chinese students learn English from their first footstep into the door at the school until they leave for college, and you're gonna have a very difficult time finding people who can even have a basic conversation in English. I still haven't figured out exactly why this is, because Cambodia, who puts almost no money because they don't have it into English education, has a lot of English speakers. India is another one. They learn it in school. But in India, tons of people speak fluent English. It was shocking when I landed in India. And every day I meet at least one fluent speaker that I've never seen before. And they just want to say hello and share a few thoughts. But their thoughts are like, oh, those tariffs are going to make everything terrible for all the world's economies again. And I think about how well I can converse in Mandarin and how I don't know the word for tariff, and I would definitely get that wrong. I would have to say, like, too bad about the big up money, buy goods money, huh? So I don't know exactly what it is that lets some people who study English their whole lives not catch on at all, and other people who study English catch on quite easily. In any case, you're going to travel to a bunch of places where there are not many fluent English speakers. So you should learn at least the basics of the language because it makes everything easier. If you just learn thank you, bathroom, water, food, like a few things, it's going to make your life so much easier. This and that are huge. You can still point, but if you say this, you're going to get better service than if you just point a few times. Which leads me into locals appreciating your effort. You don't have to have a perfect accent. You don't have to know the word. You can talk around the gaps in your vocabulary. You can talk around your accent. You can come up with words that work instead of what you are supposed to say. And especially if you are an English speaker and they know you're American, they're going to be surprised and impressed that you're even making the effort, because our reputation abroad for even trying to speak a few words of the language is pretty poor. It's pretty dismal. It's very dismal. It's an appalling reputation, and it's fairly well deserved. I cannot count the number of times that I have just used a phrase or a couple words that I was familiar with in a new country, and the entire demeanor of the person I'm talking to changes. Whether I'm buying food or clothes or gifts or whatever, if I'm in Japan and arigato, or India, dhanyavad, like there's such an immediate giddy response that this guy who clearly isn't from the area and doesn't know anything at least has picked up a couple words. And it has been expressed to me by the better English speakers that they appreciate you care enough to basically honor their culture by participating it as well as you can, even if as well as you can is dipping a toe in the water. Learning just a few basic words is going to warm all of the locals to your otherwise blundering missteps through their carefully cultivated neighborhood and gardens. Locals love it when you speak their language. It's kind of the same thing as if you're eating their food and you clearly enjoy it. People love seeing that too. I find people trying to sell you something also try to downplay the amount they're trying to rip you off. If you even know 1 through 10, or even if you just know how much, if you just say how much in English, they'll understand you, but you're probably on the way to get the highest quoted price they think they can get off of you. But if you say, 是多少钱, then they'll still try and up the price a little bit, but you're going to get a much more realistic quote most of the time. And if you know the numbers, then you can haggle very easily. Determine the value of what you want to buy, lowball them, they're going to highball you, and then you meet in the middle, the price you wanted to pay originally. Ooh, and quick note, I've never had this happen when I just say like this or that, or I don't speak any of the language, but almost every time when I go to an open market and I speak in the language, hoy quiero 6 aguacates, gracias, they give me an extra one. I always get, I mean, not always, but it happens quite often in markets if you're speaking the language. They'll throw in an extra avocado or like an extra, bit of steak or whatever it is that you're buying. So it helps with everything if you just pick up a few basic words, and you can learn those in a few days on an app or anything. Let's talk about apps. Duolingo is the obvious one, and until a few years back, it was my go-to. I learned Italian, Portuguese, Japanese. I already knew Mandarin, but I went through the whole course just kind of as a refresher. German. I even learned Irish, a different language than Gaelic. There were so many languages that they offered that the community puts together for Duolingo, and then you get to benefit from the hard work of hundreds and thousands of volunteers who made this language course for you, just put into the scaffolding of the Duolingo tiers. I could not believe how effective it was. And that's without being comprehensive. Duolingo missed tons of basic phrases and vocabulary that would have been very helpful. And it wasn't exactly structured like incrementally. It's more study this simple thing and then it'll get kind of harder later on. But the topics aren't connected. It's very easy to get lost in the different topics of Duolingo. But that didn't seem to matter. As long as I put in 30 minutes a day or something like that, I could very clearly tell that I was getting better at talking and just more comfortable around everybody else speaking this language I was putting a little bit of time into. Even one lesson a day made a difference in Portugal. So I used to highly recommend Duolingo, and the problem now is that they destroyed everything, and I can't use it at all. I have tried to use it since they retooled the entire app, but it's so plodding and uninviting with the new crown system, and they took away all the fun game incentives. So it still has the bad structure, but you're basically just learning vocabulary flashcards at this point. It doesn't encourage you as much, or I don't get that out of Duolingo like I used to. So you should try it out, because if I'm somehow missing something, or most people can get something out of the app that I can't, it was a great resource for me for years until they retooled everything and I can't use it anymore, or I don't like to use it anymore. Other than Duolingo, I didn't have a ton of success with the other apps. Memrise or Babbel or whatever there was, I just didn't really connect with those. And I like studying at my own pace. And because I'll get into a language and then just surge forward 5 chapters, just be like, okay, that's interesting, and okay, sure. And none of the apps I used had the structure I liked or the ability to teach me what I wanted to know. And like I said, even though Duolingo missed a whole bunch of stuff, by the end of a Duolingo course, I was pretty confident using that language around town or with a local. I knew it didn't sound great, by which I mean I knew it sounded terrible, but I also knew that they would understand me and I would get most of my meaning across, and they could help pick up the slack as a native speaker. I started using Drops, and that's pretty good for basic vocabulary, but I don't know if that's developed as much as I would like it to be an actual recommendation, although it does help me get into the language, and it's only 3 minutes a lesson. And the art is nice. It's a fun little gamified language app. So that's my second now. That's the one I use instead of Duolingo now, but I'm not getting out of it what I got out of Duolingo. So let's move on to Rosetta Stone. Now, I haven't used the app, but I can very easily see how the PC program fits right into an app form, and the PC program of Rosetta Stone is the most comprehensive, structured, and useful language learning tool I have ever used, leaps and bounds ahead of the competition, Duolingo included. Even in my Duolingo heyday, I knew I wasn't quite learning everything I should, and my brain wasn't absorbing everything as effortlessly as I do with Rosetta Stone. It's so natural and so easy to pick up. The pictures, the reference pictures they use, particularly in Rosetta Stone, are fantastic. So you can't mistake a spatula for a fork, which happens in every other program I have ever used to study a language. Half the time, they'll say something, you'll have to study the image for a second to know what they're talking about. But with Rosetta Stone, great image references, great audio references too. It goes by gender, so if you're looking at a picture of a young woman, you're going to get a voice of a young woman saying the phrase they're trying to teach you. Or an older man, you're going to get the voice of an older man, which really helps my brain click into the meaning of something. It feels so much more like there's a real person talking. My brain just pays more attention to the phrase they're trying to teach me. And the pronunciation is great. Also very important with the audio and the vocabulary is it's more accurate. All of the apps, including Duolingo, will use the common dictionary definition of whatever's online, especially with AI these days. But Rosetta Stone has the real definitions and words and just the vocabulary that you would actually use in the real world. I find their audio and their vocabulary so much better structured. So you don't have to go through all this work of memorizing a phrase and then find out you've been using 3 extra words the whole time because you're using an AI-powered app that just grabbed a random definition from an online dictionary. Rosetta Stone's audio is clear and accurate. Very relevant lessons connected to each other, and it builds very clearly. It's so easy to tell the amount of work that linguists and devs have put into this program. So if you're interested in languages, Rosetta Stone is number one. It just works. If you are walking around or you want to supplement to Rosetta Stone, the Pimsleur audio courses are great. They are particularly useful in learning the cadences and rhythms I was talking about, so that when someone like a local speaks to you, you don't get bowled over and confused by this huge wall of words that you can't differentiate. The Pimsleur audio courses completely changed that for me. When I was listening to someone speak Chinese, it was just like a tsunami of foreign phonemes that I didn't understand. But just by listening to the Pimsleur courses while I was running or whatever, even though they were speaking at the same speed, the way they introduce it, which is very basic, they just introduce the English and then the local language. I don't know how they do it, but they trained my brain to understand words distinctly, and it just made more sense to me after listening to the Pimsleur courses. So I recommend Rosetta Stone and Pimsleur as a supplement, But the number one thing, no matter what you use, whether it's a book or an AI app or Rosetta Stone, is consistency and time. The amount of time you put into studying the language will directly affect what you get out of it. It really is one-to-one. If you're studying 15 minutes a day, you're going to learn something for sure, especially if you study every day 15 minutes. If you learn 30, you're going to learn twice as much. It is such a direct feedback that you should experiment with it. Like, you can check yourself, spend 5 days working 15 minutes a day, and then spend 5 days working 30 minutes a day at whatever language you're doing, and you'll just see such a rapid increase, twofold, some might say. And it can really supercharge your language learning by just adding a few more minutes a day. It makes such a big difference. So if you're planning on traveling long term and you stay in one place longer, like 2 or 3 months at a time, or 6 months at a time, or a year, it's really worth it to put in the time that first week you get there so that you can immediately be immersed in the culture and get to talking with people from that culture sooner. Because that's the next thing. That's what's so valuable. Everything a local tells you is going to help you better understand the culture and what's happening, and help you interact with the country more and appreciate what is happening around you more. The better you understand what the locals are saying, the better you're going to understand every single thing about that country. And I don't mean the functionalities or practicalities of where the biblioteca is. It's more like why you should eat that before you eat that. Because rice will settle your stomach and prep it for solid food and oil. Or why everybody seems more confrontational. Because they're speaking in a tonal language, and the only way to consistently make sure people are understanding subtle differences in tones every phoneme, you need to talk louder. Or what that particular action you've noticed 10% of the population of that country doing every time they walk by a box. That one is Thai people praying at prayer houses while walking down the street. Every single prayer house on the street. So if you're lucky enough to meet a local who can speak even conversational English, ask them your questions, or just listen. People are happy to explain in whatever level of detail you want the questions you have about their culture, especially if they're not expecting to see you there in their country. They'll be happy to tell you everything you want to know about every aspect that you don't yet understand. You don't want to badger anyone, but I have found that people love sharing their knowledge about their culture. They're proud to share what they know, and they're very gratified that you care enough to ask these questions. I often refer to learning languages as building a subway map of the language in your brain. Like, each significant word to you that you learn makes the entire subway map more concrete, more real, and more significant to your brain. If you need to learn something, or you really like learning something, your brain learns it faster. So I tend to gravitate toward the things I enjoy the most first. So I always learn food first in a country. I always learn how to say, like, tree, book, the things that I care about. My hobbies, hiking or reading or food especially. I learn those words first, and those become anchor points, and I can go off of that. Book, okay, so what's read? What's the plural for books? If I know that, then I can apply it to trees. And it all spirals out of these vocabulary hubs, and the more hubs that I have, the more well-connected the language becomes in my brain, and the more my brain cares about it. If I strictly follow the curriculum that an app might teach me, and I'm like, okay, I have to learn this word before I learn that word because that's the order they've presented it to me, it's going to be slower and my brain isn't going to care as much. So definitely find the words that you care about more and just learn those. Learn those words that you can easily remember, whether it's music or guitar specifically or marine life. Whatever it is that your brain can easily latch onto, learn as much about that stuff that you like first, because then your brain is going to attach significance to these new sounds and mouth shapes that you're making. It's going to be like, oh, this must be something important because we like this. Like, we already care about this. So it'll be easier to learn other stuff if you teach your brain, hey, look, there's a bunch of stuff we already like that I can learn, that I want to learn. You can spring off of that knowledge base, however brief or meager that knowledge base may seem in the beginning. One of the first things I do when I land in a country is grab a menu. I kind of miss that they don't have paper menus at many places anymore, because I would get a menu, translate what sounded great to me, and I would remember a few of those at least. And I'd order them, and once I ordered food, my brain was like, oh, this is a food sound? Okay, we'll remember this forever then. So I'm never going to forget Si Hong Shi Ji Dan Mian, or Hui Guo Rou, or Pijio Kao Ya. I'm never going to forget those for the rest of my life, because those are some of my favorite foods in China, and my brain is like, yeah, this is what we care about. And by using that, if I go into a restaurant and I say, can I get the Pijio Kao Ya, the person is going to say back, xi or dui or whatever back to me, and my brain's going to connect their response with what I said, building off of that hub that I made. So whatever field you're interested in or subject you're interested in, learn those words first that you feel naturally inclined toward. And any response or connection to that vocabulary is going to naturally build the subway map of whatever language you're learning in your mind. It'll become easier to learn other words that are connected to the things you naturally care about. Spanish was probably the first language I learned back in high school, but I did pretty well at that. And then nothing. I basically didn't try again to learn any language for 10 years until I went to China. And I was like, okay, I'm going to teach English here. I'll be here a while. I should learn some stuff. And that's how I figured out a lot of these language tips I'm sharing with you. It was just through trying a whole bunch of different things. Like the menu thing, after a few days, maybe a couple weeks, of not making any progress, I was like, okay, I know words for food. I'm going to remember those words. So I guess I should learn all of the words for food on the menu, and maybe I can build off of that. Because regular interactions weren't helping me. I could say the basic ones, how are you, and what are you doing? But as soon as I said, how are you, they'd answer with like 5 different sentences, and I'd just be like, I don't know, sorry. So I went to my favorite restaurant, took a menu, and worked on that. And I knew all those words. And then when I had that like focal point, like I said, any response I got when I talked about food, my brain cataloged. It was like, okay, this is the response to this. What is that word? Does it mean, salty or sweet? Okay, we'll remember salty and sweet then. Do you like, do you not like? And it just built up from there. Once I know do you like something, I can apply that to all topics, not just food. Oh, do you like this music? Oh, do you like America? Oh, do you like China? Also, making your own rules to remember, or at least for me, making my own rules to remember really helped me with Chinese. The tones, any way that a textbook explained it, I was like, I get the tones are different, and I understand in English we have, is that a ball? That is a ball. Like, I know the tones are different in English also, but I just can't wrap my brain around the 4 different tones. I didn't know at that time that Cantonese had 9 tones, or Thai had 23, or whatever it is. But I couldn't even wrap my head around these 4 tones. I was trying to brute force the memorization of every single word, even though my brain didn't appreciate the differences between tones, and only the basic neutral tone and interrogative tone in English. So I came up with a system of the 4 main Mandarin tones. So this is the 4 main Mandarin tones. Ah, 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 ah. The way these 4 tones are always taught is 1, 2, 3, 4. Flat, rising, falling, then rising, falling, which is mildly descriptive, but not exactly intuitive. So I came up with robot, question, unsure, angry. And the first time I thought of that, I remembered that. So robot, question, unsure, angry, And as soon as I did that, I was like, okay, I get the tones now. 1, 2, 3, 4. Robot, question, unsure, angry. And then neutral, And every time I hired a new teacher or someone asked me to explain Chinese to them, they were like, what the heck is up with those tones? And it was like, easier than you think. So, robot, question, unsure, angry. And every single person I have explained that to, I'll give them the 4 tones without telling them my scaffolding for them. And they'll be like, how the heck can you remember that? And then you say, robot, question, unsure, angry. And then I'll be like, okay, so the word is ma, and it's unsure. And they'll go, ma, because they know what unsure sounds like. But if I said, okay, the word is ma with the 3rd tone, their brain's like, what the fuck is the 3rd tone? Nobody knows what the 3rd tone is. So it really makes a difference if you can understand the way a language process works in a way that makes sense to you, like intuitive sense. That is just as valid as whatever is written on the page or this app is speaking to you. Make that in your brain, and your brain will remember it better. Your brain's telling you how to think about it. I just thought, what does that sound like if it's flat? Sounds like a robot. Okay. What about That's a question. So you can make up these scaffolding in between the subway hubs of vocabulary and phrases in your mind and place what you are learning within the scaffolding that is most intuitive to yourself. Mnemonics are also great. So there's hui guo rou, which is twice cooked pork. But if I even think hui guo rou, that sounds like, hey, great roe. Roe I remember because it's meat. I'm not going to forget that. It's used in every type of meat. But hui guo, twice cooked pork. But if I think, hey, great meat, my brain will remember that because it's a phrase that makes sense to me intuitively. I want to eat great meat. So hui guo rou becomes, hey, great meat. And having that pairing just makes it easier to learn that phrase because it's connecting to something my brain already knows, the English phrase and the meaning of hey, great meat. And to be clear, don't use the same mnemonic I use because your brain network has different connections. Just find any mnemonic that works for you and make that connection, whatever that connection is. Because if it's the most natural connection to you, your brain will remember it. So any pairing, any instinctual technique that tells you how to absorb vocabulary or makes a phrase more relevant to you, go with that. It will work. It will stick in your brain better. And every single word, every single phoneme that you're able to stick in your brain creates that subway map, that scaffolding that connects everything else. And soon you're going to be using sentences, or very importantly, since you aren't going to be fluent for a long time, you'll be able to cobble stuff together. If you learned very cold and then you learned water a long time ago, but you don't know how to say ice, if you say very cold, cold, cold water to someone in their language, they'll be like, oh, ice. And then you'll have that word. You'll still be able to get around. Even barely conversational, you'll be able to get your meaning across, and people will be able to help you with whatever you're looking for. Speaking of this, let's talk about difficulty. It's often said like Chinese is one of the most difficult languages in the world, or whatever is one of the most difficult languages in the world. I don't see a huge difference between all of the languages I've studied in terms of difficulty. Like the complex characters of Chinese are much more difficult for a Western audience to discern than moving from English to Spanish would be, of course. But that's just the written connotation. The language itself has never made much of an impact. The amount of time I put into studying that language makes a way bigger difference. The more time I put into a language, the better I get at that language. That's it. Like, no matter which country I've been in. Every single time, the more I study, the better I get at that language. I like to think about that like instruments. Like, people think of the guitar as really easy to learn, and people think of the violin as very difficult to learn. But they're both pieces of wood with some strings on them, and if you put in as much time to the violin that you put in to the guitar, you're going to get good at either instrument. Maybe you can pluck along with guitar tunes quicker, but you're still going to learn the violin if you put time into the violin. You're going to learn the flute if you put time into the flute. None of the people born in that country are inherently amazing at Portuguese. They grew up with Portuguese, so they naturally had to put a whole bunch of time into it, and now they're fluent Portuguese speakers. Speaking any language is the exact same. You're starting from nowhere.
you put time and dedication into that language, you are going to learn that language. Which brings us to age. Now, I always hear that it's easier for young people to learn a language more than old people. I think that's due to like the natural plasticity. They're absorbing more stuff the younger they are usually. But it is not a significant factor in learning languages as far as I'd seen.
Time is the factor here, and focus, because kids don't have a ton of things going on in their lives. They don't have to worry about getting to their job or what the utility bill is going to be next week or what their boyfriend did last week to their dog. Dark. But they don't have a lot of concerns going on. So when children are learning something, that's what they're doing. That's like 25% of their lives is learning the primary colors. So, of course, it's easier for them to learn new languages. They're not getting up to much else. And having taught such a range of ages, I don't see the important factor as age. I simply see it as how much time and focus you spend on learning a language.
Anyone who tries to learn a language and puts time into that learning process learns the language. I have taught people 60 years old who have picked up English pretty quickly, and they can appreciate more complex phrases, so sometimes quicker than the kids because they're able to learn more and categorize it better, and they understand their brains better, so they know what they're learning. Kids will learn quickly, but adults will learn quickly too. That said, I know tons of adults who just don't try and then will live in a country for literally 15 years and still know almost nothing about the language. And they chalk it down to, no, it's too difficult. But they won't try learning the language because they think it's too difficult. I've worked with those people too. I am firmly convinced that anyone at any age can learn any language. It's just investing your time. And that investment pays dividends. There is so much value you get from hearing the things you're curious about in the new country from the locals themselves. Uncountable the number of times that someone has said something offhand that I hadn't considered, and all of a sudden a bunch of stuff clicks in place. And even if you can't speak the language well, if you start trying to speak their language and they happen to speak English better than you speak Italian or whatever, they'll be much more gracious about trying to meet you halfway and using your language than they would be otherwise if they knew that you weren't even trying to learn anything about their culture. You showing that you care about their culture means, okay, well, at least this person is worth talking to. They're not completely self-absorbed. And that can be a great key into places you should travel, food you should try, or just stuff that you should know about the country to better appreciate the time you're spending in it. Okay, another tool I'll throw in that I only recently started using are podcasts. I actually didn't listen to many podcasts for a long time, but when I started learning Arabic, I was like, oh, you know what? I listen to podcasts all the time now. Maybe I should check if and there are like 100 Arabic podcasts. So it's very simple to try a few and just see what works for you. I find them very helpful, just like the Pimsleur I was talking about earlier. They give you a native speaker speaking in their cadence, teaching you vocabulary and useful phrases. It's usually not as structured as the Pimsleur course will be, but there is something about having a real person earnestly teaching their language, or just a word at a time, that I find easier for my brain to reciprocate with and try to learn what they're saying, much more than reading a word in a book. If I hear it, it makes much more sense. So podcasts are amazing. I would try them out. There's an overwhelming amount for every single language, but that's difficult to choose one, but you're probably on the upside going to find one that you can appreciate.
You know what? Since this turned into more of a tips episode than I thought it was going to, the number one passive way to learn a language is something that I've done, and you have to have a lot of discipline to do it. But again, it is passive. So the discipline is really only you have to watch a thing. I used to use Muzzy as a kid. You watched a movie over and over, and then you learned that language passively by watching that thing. So when I was having trouble understanding people in Mandarin, I actually watched Wu Hu Cong Long, the Liang version of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. And it's funny because people are from all over Asia, so the accents are all different. But they are all speaking Mandarin, sometimes even phonetically, because some of them speak Cantonese instead or a completely different language. And I watched that movie every day for 2 months or something, maybe 6 weeks. So I watched that 2-hour movie or whatever. Yeah, for 40 days, I don't know. And for the first week, I was like, I think my ears are tuning into this more. And almost immediately, by the second week, everyone was asking me how my Chinese had improved so drastically from 1 week to the next. They were like, last week you didn't understand anything I said, and now it seems like you understand my entire sentence and all of the sentences I'm saying. And I told them that technique, and one person used it, and they learned English from 1 month to the next. So it definitely works, but you also have to watch the same thing and just let your brain get used to it. Which, when they talk about how kids learn, they watch the exact same thing 100 times in a row. So I don't know, maybe there's something to it. I will just say that personal tip worked for me wonders. I was amazed at how quickly my comprehension and my speaking level improved. Just picked a movie in the language I wanted to learn, watched it once a day for, 6 weeks when I stopped. But I saw a definite improvement after the first week. And the native speakers around me saw that improvement as well and commented on it. So it's a drastic measure, but if you want to learn language a lot faster, that works. I've had a couple other people try it. And for every person that actually stuck with it for 2 weeks, I think 3 weeks was the longest anyone else made it, because everyone's like, I don't want to watch this out again. But everyone who made it a couple weeks was like, yeah, it worked, but I hate watching the same thing over and over. But it's Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Talk about a fun movie. So if you're studying Mandarin Chinese, I recommend that. And connections, again, are just as important. The English word juggernaut is a direct derivative of the name of the Hindu god Jagannath, like this big, buff god that Indians have. And I know, like, the X-Men character, so I can make that connection, and I'll remember that word for the rest of my life. So because the language has become more significant to my interests, any new part of that language will become more natural and simpler to assimilate. There really aren't any pitfalls to learning new languages, especially the language of the country you're living in. People like you more when you're traveling. You'll like the people more. You'll appreciate the culture more. It's fun to say new things in words that sound crazy, to me anyway. I love doing that. It's a little scary at first, but as soon as you say mangia zucchero in Italian, and the guy is like, oh, he wants to eat something sweet, and gives you shows you where all the sweets are kept, it's so satisfying to see the people light up and be like, oh, he is speaking our language. That's okay. It's very satisfying to see that appreciation on someone else's face. And seeing that appreciation makes me care so much more about all the people around me. I'm like, okay, they like it if they can see I care about their country and their culture. At the end of it, learning languages comes down to putting in the time, finding the things you care about and learning those first so that you have something to build off of, and putting in the time. And then get out there and speak a few words. The first time you're going to be nervous, but as soon as you use a phrase correctly and someone lights up, it is so encouraging. Even if they say 5 things after that you don't understand, you just changed how you interact with the world. If you now know how to order roast duck, you'll always know that. And now in that whole country, you can order roast duck. That changes your experience of the country. I highly recommend learning the language of the places you travel to. I try to wherever I go. And of course, if you have any questions about specific languages or you're just curious about anything, you can send an email to bitofarambler@gmail.com and I'll get back to you. And it looks like flights are $132 from Florida to Brazil right now, and there are who knows how many free apps it looks like on the Play Store for Brazilian Portuguese. Manaus is waiting. Go hang out in Brazil for a while.